Welcome, and we'll continue now our Education Week celebration of leadership with a lecture from Professor Allen Phelps, or as we know him, Al. Al came to the University of Wisconsin in 1990, and he has served as professor in the Department of Educational Leadership and Policy Analysis and the director of the Center on Education and Work from 1990 through 2011. As well, he served as department chair. Through over 3 decades of research, teaching, and public service, Al's work has focused on the interaction between education and economic sectors, particularly on improving policy and practice in career and technical education, secondary special education, and major education initiatives connecting education and work. As both professor and director of the Center on Education and Work, his projects have examined a number of things, including restructured high schools that include youth with disabilities, post-school outcome analyses, career-focused and community-linked charter high schools, integrating performance accountability and educational improvement strategies. Under Al's leadership, the Center on Education and Work has been committed to developing and disseminating evidence-based policy and practice for advancing in multiple and connected contexts, for example, school, work, college, community, and family settings. As a professor of educational leadership, he taught courses related to school-community connections and leadership in education and work systems for high schools and leadership in 2-year colleges. Al has served as the site director and member of the board of directors for the National Center for Research on Vocational Education. He is intimately familiar with the research and national policy concerns affecting programs focused on education for work. His most recent research focuses on 2 questions. To what extent and in what ways do education and work reforms, such as employer-linked charter schools or youth apprenticeship programs, contribute to students' academic achievement and post-school success? And what forms of professional learning and development are instrumental to helping educators develop practices, programs, and policies that are deemed effective? His research on these matters has been funded by the United States Department of Education, the National School to Work Office, the National Center for Research in Vocational Education, and several Wisconsin state agencies. Today, as you can see, he shares with us his presentation entitled Developing Systematic Innovations that Connect Education and the Economy. Please join me in welcoming Professor Allen Phelps.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you, Julie, for that most generous introduction, as Paul said. I, too, just want to echo what Paul said about having been here 21 years, and 12 years before that at Champaign-Urbana, and a couple years before that at Penn State. This place is just phenomenal. The faculty here and the graduate students here in the School of Education are just, super to work with, and, have never had anything but the richest and deepest ideas about how to make education better for a wide range of sectors, whether it's elementary schools or preschools or whether it's high schools or what we'll talk a little bit about here, some post-secondary education, initiatives. It's been just a fabulous community to be part of, and Paul mentioned the faculty at ELPA, and I want to mention the rest of the faculty across the School of Education. People like Mitchell Nathan from CNI have really, helped me understand in the last couple of years what learning sciences are all about and how people learn in multiple kinds of settings beyond school, and the way in which we connect school learning to learning beyond school and post-secondary education is going to be increasingly critical, obviously, in the changing economy. But we've got great colleagues in places like engineering, great colleagues in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences who've been part of NSF grants and other kinds of grants that I think have had a really important impact on the work that's gone on in the School of Education and the Wisconsin Careers Information System, which many of you know now is the manager for the portal in Singapore, and as well as for 60% of the Wisconsin school district. It's a great venue in which to work and to have an idea and to have ways and resources that allow you to connect your research to practices and things like information systems that students use on a daily basis, not only in Wisconsin but all over the world. So this is a fabulous place, and I'm glad that I spent the majority of my time here compared to these other Big Ten institutions, and it's really a great place. I want to talk a little bit about, as you can see from the slides, some ideas that are integral to this NSF project that some of my colleagues, Shuli Wang, who's new on the faculty in ALPA, and Janet Washburn, who's not here, and Sunyu Chen, who's a graduate student in educational psychology. We've started on this little journey with some NSF funding to kind of look at the question of post-secondary education and how do we make sure that good, high-quality research on the manufacturing and engineering technology pathways and programs, what kinds of outcomes are students and faculty seeing from those programs, what kinds of benefits are there for businesses and small manufacturing businesses across Wisconsin, which, as you'll see, make up about 20% of our economy now in this state. And how do we continue to make sure that that sector has the right mix of skills, experiences, and knowledge that are going to be necessary as we move into the next generation of manufacturing and focus in on everything from robotics to green manufacturing to other kinds of technologies and changes that are taking place in the world of work. My thanks to Janet and Shuli and Hans Sunyu, who've helped kind of think about this paper, and it's kind of designed as a little way to get at some questions that I think are going to guide our work, and at the same time hopefully connect it to education research and things that are going to be important in the department as well as in the School of Education. So here are 3 questions that I'd like to share with you today, some thinking and some concepts from our proposal, and talk a little bit about what ideas and suggestions you might have or ways in which to revise and refine and extend this research. It does have implications for, although leadership's not as part of the questions, but if we can figure out, as Paul suggested, various ways to study implementation of educational innovation and think about the reforms that are taking place in high schools that Paul talked about, and figure out ways in which to understand the relationship and the payoff of those changes and innovations to student outcomes as students move into post-secondary education, then I think the learning experiences for students obviously will become better, but more importantly, we'll see ways in which to connect technical colleges to the last couple of years of high schools much more systematically and much more effectively as young people look at the wide range of career opportunities that are out there and that are being extended by the global economy. So I think there's a great opportunity here to look at what tighter alignment between economic and educational context really means, to talk a little bit about what are the key features of promising innovations for developing some of these tighter alignments. We've got things like advanced placements courses. We've got things like dual credit that are taking place more prominently in high schools that are giving kids advantages in head starts in post-secondary education, and the extent to which those pay off in terms of degrees and credentials and earnings and employment are going to be important questions as the economy gets more substantially tighter and has less flexibility, and helping to build the career guidance information resources to help students understand which pathways have different kinds of benefits and different types of returns in the short term and the long run are really going to be vital. And we're on the 3rd question now in terms of beginning to step back and look at different ways to put our hypotheses on the table and to build partnerships with high schools and technical colleges to begin to figure out what the data are saying and what the innovations look like that are being implemented in terms of different kinds of work-based learning, different kinds of assessment, different kinds of dual credit, kinds of opportunities. And so figuring out how to measure those kinds of outcomes is going to be really critical, those questions, or address those questions. So why do tighter alignments matter? The skill gaps that have been produced by the global economic recession are rapidly emerging, and emerging at a rapidly changing pace, and a pace that I think most colleges and universities are struggling to keep up with, and certainly high schools as well. Instead of thinking about it as labor market supply and demand, we don't think about it as much that way as we used to. There's still obviously going to be some shortages for skilled labor and skilled workers in particular fields and particular pathways, but trying to predict what those are in a changing economy with all kinds of other economic issues surrounding the economy and decisions undergirding employers, factors undergirding employers' decisions to stay, in different communities or to export their jobs to other countries are having a profound effect. It's the skill gap and it's the educational systems that support some of that, but there are a variety of other factors involved. So we see new models emerging, whereas the folks in engineering now don't think about the traditional disciplines of engineering. They think about the engineering global challenges and what is it going to take to build energy from fusion? What is it going to take to replace America's urban infrastructure? Those are the kinds of skill sets and knowledge accumulation knowledge maps that they're trying to help young people develop as they think about engineering. So engineering becomes much different in terms of its global structure and its organization and its efficiency. The infrastructure, as Paul suggested, how schools are and how colleges and universities are these days are very different from what they've been in the past. Their capacity to change, their capacity to respond to the economy, their capacity to change based upon the needs of new students who are coming in, people who need particular skill upgrades or need particular opportunities in order to continue to be successful in their service organization or with their employer are going to be critical. And we have to figure out ways in which to provide different types of instruction, different kinds of internship experiences, different types of assessments that allow educators and students to navigate the connections and distances between education and economic and community opportunities for contribution. So there are two recent reports that have come out fairly recently. I'm running a little bit behind here, that give us a good understanding of what the skills gaps are and what the research implications are for different kinds of changes that have taken place. So if we look at the changes in the economy and we begin to see that we not only have had substantial unemployment, which still hovers around 9%, that our economy's begun to grow a little bit in financial markets. Indices have risen over the past year and a half. Employment growth has been modest, and unemployment has remained well above 9%. Yet the ranks of the long-term unemployed workers have reached the highest levels that they've ever seen in 60 years. So we're looking at a very different kind of economy and obviously a very different economic recovery period, which is going to require, I think, different kinds of responses and changes from educational institutions and technologies. The nature and skills gap that have become common have unique implications for a wide range of stakeholders. So what this means for students and people who are in the workforce, it means something very different than what it meant several years ago. What it means for educators in terms of how they understand and engage students in project-based learning, problem-based learning, case-related learning, all of that is critical as well in terms of thinking about the kinds of pedagogy and the kinds of changes that are taking place. So as we look at regions and as we look at industry sectors and we look at individuals, it doesn't matter which lens you put on this. The real issue is that the context matters. So being in the Midwest, being a male, being in manufacturing, being long-term unemployed as opposed to short-term unemployed has huge consequences in terms of the kind of education and training experiences that are going to be essential for you getting back into the labor market. This gives you from the Center on Education and Workforce Development at Georgetown, this gives you a picture of where the trends are in terms of looking at the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the projections through 2018. Obviously, Indiana, Iowa, Illinois, and Kansas are going to lead the economic growth in terms of this, the next 6 to 8 years in terms of looking at 9 to 10% growth. We're expecting moderate growth here in Wisconsin. In places that traditionally have been heavy manufacturing, places like Indiana and Michigan are going to be on the short end of the economic recovery in terms of the growth according to Tony Carnevale's projections. How have we been doing in terms of keeping up? Well, this is the 2009 snapshot in terms of jobs that require post-secondary education and the demand for post-secondary education. So you can see Wisconsin has done a fairly good job, even though that the demand for new post-secondary jobs is rising fairly substantially in terms of the educational requirements. We've been doing, through the technical college system and the UW system, I think, what these data suggest, an adequate job of keeping up in business, keeping up in engineering and healthcare in terms of meeting that rising demand. If you look more carefully at the supply chain in terms of who's in the pipeline and what kinds of post-secondary education is going to be vital going down the road. So the president has in 2020 and the Lumina Foundation in 2025 set post-secondary education completion goals at the level of 60%. So the goal here is to think about economic recovery and economic stability and productivity by having a much higher skilled workforce than what we currently have now. And in Wisconsin, we're looking at a gap of about 13 or 14%, even though right now, or not right now, in the projected future in 2018, we're going to need 61% of the Wisconsin jobs to be associate's degrees, post-secondary credentials, or bachelor's degrees, or graduate degrees. But that mix is changing fairly substantially. And even with the projected young people coming out of high school, projections on people returning to the technical college system from employment, we're still looking to have an additional 6% increase every year in terms of post-secondary completion. So if we're going to meet that goal of having 60% of our workforce with post-secondary credentials beyond the age of 25, we've got a substantial ways to go in terms of increasing the productivity in terms of degree completion and certificate completion in Wisconsin. One of the important things about this, I think, is to disaggregate the labor market a little bit and to begin to look more carefully at what we see here in terms of industry sectors. And so if you look carefully at this, you can see that manufacturing is a fairly substantial part of Wisconsin's economy. So even though we're, we've got a variety of different sectors in the economy. The major sector in Wisconsin is roughly which represents roughly 20% of our gross domestic product, or our real GDP, for the last 5 years has been the manufacturing center. And if you look at the percentage of jobs, they're about 16% of all the jobs, or roughly 1 in 5 Wisconsin people that live in Wisconsin who are employed are in the manufacturing or in manufacturing-related sector. So we chose to focus on this in terms of this NSF project because even though manufacturing in general in the Midwest has been problematic, and obviously the national trends have been even more problematic, in Wisconsin it's still a significant part of our sector. And there's the Wisconsin Manufacturing Extension Partnership has projections that would suggest that growing that sector of our economy is going to be extremely critical. So we've entered into this partnership with Waukesha County Technical College, Milwaukee Area Technical College, Moraine Park, and what's the other one? Fox Valley's the other one, thank you. And we've got co-PIs on each of those campuses, including a couple of co-PIs that are graduates of the OPA program and who are there as directors of instructions or vice presidents. And they're very enthusiastic about doing many of the things that you heard described in Paul's project, which I'll talk a little bit more about here in a minute. But looking in greater detail at the data in terms of performance, in terms of admissions, in terms of recruitment, retention, and engagement in post-secondary education, specifically in the manufacturing and engineering, technology pipeline. But these skill gaps and the research priorities that are increasingly important are really focused on trying to understand the changing dynamics of these labor markets and the program and the service needs that result from them. So if we've got a higher robotic skills, for example, that are necessary in the economy, what does that mean in terms of the mix of science and mathematics and technical skills that we ought to be offering in high schools and that we ought to be providing during the first couple of years in the technical college program or experiences, regardless of whether we're talking about manufacturing engineering, or we're talking about information technology, or what other kinds of skill sets are critical to the manufacturing economy. The problems that are caused by the severity of the difficulties in the labor market, figuring out how to recover from some of the manufacturing some of the manufacturing losses that we've seen, where some of the paper industry, for example, up in the upper end of the Fox Valley, we've got substantial long-term skills that need to be upgraded and changed for many people up there. Figuring out how to organize, learning exchanges that allow people in business and industry to come back and pick up short-term certificates and technical skills is going to be a critical part of this equation and scenario. Sorting out the changing structural demand from the demand-efficient causes of supply and labor market distress is essential. So it's what courses that we offer, but it's also what courses do business and industry really need. What are the new skills and knowledges relative to robotics and to computer-aided manufacturing that new technology has brought forward into the marketplace that may or may not be in our curriculums in some of these engineering technology and manufacturing and high-end welding programs. And understanding and anticipating the labor market, the workforce needs and skill requirements, especially related to energy and green jobs. I mentioned that earlier. And then again, if you look at subsections, if you look at the state as a whole, we've got significant unemployment problems concentrated in places like urban areas and in some of our Indian reservations up north. So we need to begin to factor in where people live and what kinds of skills and cultural backgrounds they bring to the labor market and they bring to educational systems and opportunities. So beyond just looking at supply and demand and looking at labor market projections and looking at the manufacturing and engineering technology in general, I think there are a number of new models for thinking about this in education, which I think are going to be quite helpful to us. 2 years ago, the National Academy of Engineering created 14 grand engineering challenges. I didn't put the web link up here for that, but it would be really interesting to go and look at it because the National Academy now thinks about all these challenges that are out there. How are we going to manage the health, bioinformatics information, effectively? How are we going to build energy from fusion? How are we going to ensure cybersecurity? How are we going to, as a country, begin to rebuild urban infrastructure? So thinking about engineering in different ways instead of just worrying about where are the jobs and what kinds of jobs and earnings can I get if I get an associate's degree or I get a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering by the time I'm 25. There have to be, I think, these more deeper and systemic connections between the kind of lived experience of chemical engineers, of people who are accountants, of people who are in quality control, or people who are in logistics, and figuring out how can I use those skill sets to begin to accomplish some of these larger issues of ensuring the quality of the environment and the cleanliness of our air and our water, going forward, despite the manufacturing, as part of the manufacturing, enterprise in general. For the last, I would say, 15 years, ever since the School to Work movement, and probably even before that, we've seen this growth in what's called integrated or contextualized and integrated learning. So the American Chemical Society publishes a curriculum known as Chemistry in the Community, which was actually started and developed here. It's now in its 5th edition. And kids in high school, as sophomores or freshmen in high schools, when they take ChemCom, have a really, I think, rich and deep community experience, understanding the environment, understanding how chemistry concepts and formulas are critical, and the table of periodic elements is critical to understanding water quality, for example, in their community. Project Lead the Way, which many of you know and we've done some research on, which is a curriculum that spans middle schools and high schools that incorporates modules in the middle school, 9-week modules that introduce kids to robotics, for example, and high school courses entitled Principles of Engineering and Civil and Architectural Engineering, which are exploration courses, basic foundation courses in which I think some good math and science is being produced. And the problem is we haven't had Project Lead the Way long enough in these high schools to begin to track students into post-secondary education to see whether or not they make a difference in terms of helping to, ensure their post-secondary success, as well as give them some of these good exploratory skills in terms of the economy. And we hope that that's some of the things that those are some of the research questions we can begin to develop. But even if you look at colleges in general, there are freshman or first-year interest groups which have become quite popular, even at places like Madison, and are beginning to pop up now in community colleges across the country, where students are admitted as cohorts, and students are beginning to think about liberal arts and reading courses and English courses that relate to some broad fields of interest, like the economy or the environment or business operations or business management or information technology tools. And having students go through the first year of college or the first semester of college, where they're in 3 different classes and they're with the same group of students and they're with the same group of instructors over the course of 15 or 16 weeks or the entire academic year, but studying some real problems and some real issues that confront American society and figuring out what to do with it in terms of giving them a better grounding in the liberal arts or giving them a better grounding in a professional field is critical. There's the whole introduction of career pathways, which has been prominent for the last 3 to 5 years in terms of thinking about career clusters and pathways. The RISE initiative, which is Regional Industry Skills Education, which is an initiative here in Wisconsin, looks at the remediation problems for people who are in the technical college system, and how do you help people understand basic algebra or high school math concepts by giving them applications and showing the importance of arithmetic or geometric principles if they're going to study engineering programs or inner IT programs, for example. The iBest initiative is a ESL program that's popular in the state of Wisconsin or state of Washington now, where ESL instructors work directly with business instructors or IT instructors to figure out how to teach language and embed it in the concepts of the industry and skills that are critical to understanding that field in general. And again, the iBest program, when it's rigorously tested, has really good impacts on retention of non-English speaking students in community colleges in the state of Washington. As Julie mentioned, we've done a lot of work over the last decade or so on youth apprenticeship, on career academies. Those are still important initiatives, but they're underscaled. We still have less than 1% of the high school seniors in the state of Wisconsin are youth apprentices. And that program's been with us now for 15 years. And it's amazing to me that all these innovations, even though they've been around for a fairly long period of time, they get traction in certain kinds of communities and with certain kinds of teachers and with certain kinds of support from different business and industry. But figuring out how well they work, I mean, in education, we're all enamored with the what works question. But the question here is a lot deeper. What works? It's a question of what works for who, in what settings, and with what environments. So if you go into some of these manufacturing communities, like in the Fox River Valley, youth apprenticeship there, in particular, manufacturing youth apprenticeship programs are very, very popular, and they're substantially less popular in the rural northern parts of the state and then on the western side of the state as well. So we've got to begin to think about how these academies and how these ways of engaging young people earlier in high school can make a difference with a regional context taken into account. But let me show you some of the data that we've generated by looking at Project Lead the Way at Appleton. And Eric Camburn was really helpful in this project a couple of years ago. But we were able to track, with the help of teachers and district administrators and data people in Appleton, the graduating class of 2008 from Appleton East High School, which had about 315 kids in it. And about 30 of those students had taken one or more Project Lead the Way classes, which is Introduction to Principles of Engineering or Introduction to Engineering Design or Digital Electronics. They'd taken one of those 3 courses. And at the same time, they had taken about the same level of math. So they'd had about 3.5 years of math, and they'd had about 3 1/3 years of science. But look at the difference that you see in their ACT scores. It's noticeable in the ACT math score. It's noticeable in the ACT science score, both at about the 0.05 level of probability, as well as in the composite ACT. So when you show young people, where and how the science is going to be used in engineering, and where the algebra and the physics and the trigonometry might be used in post-secondary education in the engineering pathway, it gets some kids, interested and engaged. The problem we've got with this data is that we haven't been able to replicate it. We haven't been able to follow it longitudinally, to figure out if you are in this program, and it takes a long time, as Paul suggested in his remarks, to get some of these cultures and innovations in place in high school. So it's taken 7 years for the Tesla Academy to find a niche at Appleton East High School, and it's now just beginning to produce some really good results. But it's important to look at it over time and to look at it critically. So if you look across all these models, project and problem-based learning experiences are much more prominent in secondary schools and in early years of college. There's an explicit integration of the science and the math and engineering and the technical learning opportunities. In most of these cases, they're end-of-course assessments, so that students who take Project Lead the Way and score at, at an 80% or above level on the Principles of Engineering course can wind up with 3 credits of engineering on their transcript at places like UW-Madison or Milwaukee, School of Engineering. So there's some incentive for kids to be, actively, informatively, and heavily involved in the learning experiences as well. There's intensive teacher education and support. You don't get certified to teach a Project Lead the Way class unless you complete a 2-week course at Milwaukee School of Engineering, which is led by, a civil engineer. It's not led by, somebody who's just not a really well-trained professional in that field. There's always a substantial endorsement in most cases in the youth apprenticeship program, Project Lead the Way, kinds of experiences, career academies, all have these students doing experiences in industry, looking at different kinds of certificates and credentials that would be helpful. And in many of these programs, like I mentioned, the RISE program and the IBEST program in the state of Washington, there are student cohorts. So we're moving students into and through higher education in a cohort kind of fashion. All right, so let's change a little bit of our focus and look at the infrastructure challenges, getting this accomplished, getting this done at a community college or getting this done in a high school technical college partnership is really critical. The colleges now are all having to balance their missions, think differently about the mission. So in light of the economy, are we going to spend money on instructors for associate degree programs? Are we going to spend money on instruction for workplace credentials and workplace learning kinds of opportunities? And what the balance is between the investment in remedial programs, technical programs, associate degree programs in particular fields or sectors is a big challenge for the technical colleges, and trying to figure out how to do that is something that's a recurring issue and something that's always difficult. For more than a decade, the community colleges have talked about the culture of evidence, trying to figure out how to make database decisions much more effectively and systematically. But when you've got an open environment, different from a high school environment where you've got open enrollment, you've got all kinds of students there from the ages of 16 to the ages of 80, in some cases where you've got a high percentage of people who are not full-time instructors. Their secondary job, their part-time job is teaching at a technical college. There's a lot more room for variance in trying to figure out how systems work and how effective education and instruction can be is in large part an issue of how to figure out how to control the variance and remove some of the issues of getting variation in instruction and how does that influence your results. Tom Bailey and his colleagues looked at some of the issues around community colleges and made this argument that research on two-year colleges has been will have a fundamental influence only when it is used in day-to-day decision-making on the campuses. So we've got all kinds of employer follow-up studies, we've got all kinds of accreditation studies and self-study teams being done by the technical colleges, but it's a matter of making data and evidence and inference a part of decision-making on a regular basis. So if you stop and take a look at some of the networks that are beginning to emerge and that have been developed, I think what you find here is that we need, Bailey makes the argument that we need colleges where they recognize that assessing program effectiveness is a complex and lengthy process, where quantitative research on student outcomes must be combined with qualitative research on the insights of why students are generating those outcomes. Community college faculty and instructors must have opportunities to engage in the research process. The findings must be widely demonstrated, and interinstitutional collaboration is going to be critical to getting this promoted. So as Paul suggested earlier in his remarks about high school, building these communities where people do inquiry and do reflection and do analysis of data is critical and powerful to any kind of outcomes. The Carnegie Foundation on the Advancement of Teaching, which is out in California, has been looking at two programs that they've developed with about 27 different community colleges called StatWay and QuantWay, which deals with the basic issue that a lot of people come to two-year colleges without substantial math preparation and orientation for today's economy. So what they've done with teams of math instructors and technical instructors and people from institutional research offices that provide a lot of data and evidence on which students and which courses are encountering the biggest challenges and the biggest difficulties in terms of grades and completion and putting stuff on the transcript and have come away with, I think, a nice blend of a curriculum that's online and that's an open source kind of curriculum that's available to anybody who is teaching in the community college sector and wants to emphasize mathematics. But as you'll see, they've learned a whole variety of things about how to get this stuff, a much broader community of implementation research developed. There's also the Achieving the Dream Initiative, which is funded by about several different foundations, which include about 160 colleges in 30 different states. The goal there is to just figure out a way to make college community college much more successful for students from low-income backgrounds, and particularly students of color. Unfortunately, there's only one of the two-year campuses in the state, which is Northeast Tech College up in Green Bay, which is part of Achieving the Dream. It's a fairly substantial buy-in at the front end. CalPAS, which is the California Partnership for Achieving Student Success, they've figured out how to take data and upload data into regional servers. And the community colleges and the universities are all places in which data can be uploaded from high school. So you can disaggregate the data and look at the high school graduating class from Clovis High School and which particular community college in and around Fresno, or which four-year institution they're following or they're obtaining. But they basically collect and align this data and follow students, using ID numbers, and match students from their high school transcripts to their post-secondary transcripts, and turn the data back over to learning communities and figure out what are the issues in terms of what kinds of math and science, instruction, and what kind of student support is really critical to advancing student success in these post-secondary environments. So these research and innovation efforts, where you're using data much more systematically and much more effectively to understand learning, understand teaching in the community colleges, are growing. But we're hoping that our little study here can add to what this knowledge base is beginning to develop in terms of the critical features of innovations that combine innovation and research in two-year college settings. But the issues here are identifying goals as measurable gains that Paul was talking about. Many of these colleges are really, have sat down and looked at the introductory math courses and the introductory technical courses and said, we can't accept a 50% or a 60% completion rate. What's it going to take for us to double the successful completion rate in these introductory gateway courses? Moving from that into, focusing on the problem, getting the math and liberal arts people and the technical college and technical instructors together with deans of instruction who understand learning and adult learning in particular, with data people who can show transcripts and high school achievement test score data, and figuring out, given this profile of math and science skills and reading skills and these technical demands in these introductory and gateway courses, what does it take to be successful? So then going on to generate and work in teams to figure out how to put together instruction differently, how to support students differently, and then beginning to figure out a community where you can do this across programs within colleges and begin to develop a much larger professional learning community around the community college or the technical college and its business and industry partners and its local partners, in which there are these common goals and these shared values and the shared power in terms of understanding if we're going to raise the unemployment, or reduce the unemployment levels in this community. And one of the critical aspects of that is figuring out how to get people interested in the health professions better math skills when they come out of high school or before they enter a technical college. That's a powerful agenda that I think communities, can get behind. And then having the discipline to kind of watch these implementation efforts and hold measurement critical, to ask ourselves, what are we doing and why did the retention rates and the graduation rates drop last year? What students were we not successful with, and why were we not successful with those students? Having the systems to do that are critical. A copy of this is on the handouts, and I apologize for the smallness of the slide, but in case you wanted to take a closer look at it, I wanted to make some paper available. But this is what Paul, I think, described earlier as our version of the bedeviled box called education. And when you think about the connections between high schools and post-secondary education, and you think about getting improved K-16 and adult learning outcomes in what we call MET, which is manufacturing, engineering, technician, and technology education. So it's everything from welding to associate degrees in chemical engineering and everything in between. That's what we characterize as our set of MET programs, which is about 45 or 50 programs that are offered across the state in Wisconsin. But students learn about those programs in lots of different settings. There are knowledge-based, there are what we call student-centered environments where students have portfolios, where students have assessments, where students meet with advisors, and they talk about what does it take to be, in mentor, or what does it talk to be in manufacturing, and how can we find you a mentor from the community, the manufacturing community, in terms of medical products manufacturing, for example, that can work with you in terms of finding your way through this curriculum and this program, to the different kinds of assessment innovations. Most people come to community college as an open access, open entry kinds of proposition. So if they had, assessment skills or assessment data, the data are probably fairly old, so they need to be given a portfolio of assessments or given access to a variety of assessments that allow them to understand where their math and their reading and their writing skills are in today's terms. The knowledge building environments, so thinking about those courses that have got project and case-based learning within them, the more comparable issues around thinking about principles of engineering and introduction to engineering design at the college level as well as at the high school level is critical. And then more and more of those kinds of ideas and concepts in terms of what sorts of careers, what sorts of pathways, what sorts of math and science skills are really critical have to be gained by students understanding what those are like in places like ProMega or any kinds of manufacturing or engineering kinds of environments where they can see that work being done and understand why and how those math skills and science skills are going to be critical. So what we're trying to do here is figure out a way in which we can bring those learning environments together, and as you can see, those four different environments that all support learning by students and through instruction, through community-based experiences, through work experiences, all of that brought together is part of the alignment challenge. So figuring out what sorts of skills and expertise are going to be necessary is one level of alignment. Figuring out the alignment between the green boxes is another level of environment. And as you can see here on the A, B, and C, arrows here, I've tried to characterize where where the alignment is. Where it is, it's the intended alignment. So figuring out exactly what the skill level, the demands are for chemical engineering technology, for example, or welding is part of the first level of alignment. Figuring out what the alignment is between the implementation of those new programs and those new mix of math and science and technical courses is the internal level B alignment. And then figuring out the assessment, the assessed program implementation is part of C. So it's what do we want to teach, how are we teaching it, and then are we assessing what we've learned. And I think the more in which we bring all of those three questions into the education and economic context and understanding more about what work-based learning does in terms of internships that help students to not just understand where and how math and science concepts are used, but how they're applied to solve problems, makes the MET programs and makes the engineering and technology things systematically stronger and more effective as a holistic, integrated learning environment. This is our conceptual framework for the study. All of those four learning environments, you can see where we're going to generate data from high school, hopefully high school transcripts and high school records. We're going to have hopefully access to the 10th grade WKCE skills scores and know what the pre-college level was. We're hopefully, if ACT scores were recorded, which may not be the case in many students who go on to a technical college, we'd have that data available too, but begin to look at different ways of understanding their experiences during the first year of college by looking at the Community College Survey of Student Engagement, which is this particular instrument, which is similar to the NESI now and operated out of the University of Texas at Austin, but it's an annual assessment that's available to community colleges. So we're going to have a sample that samples all of the students at those four technical colleges next spring, but then we're also going to oversample all of the students who are in manufacturing and engineering technology and see what the differences look like in terms of some of their benchmarks. So you can see academic challenge is a measure of the SESI instrument, collaborative learning, the extent to which students have internships, the extent to which students are asked to solve problems in consultation with people in manufacturing. For example, we ought to be able to pick some of those kinds of things up. The level and type of faculty-student interaction, student efforts, how students see themselves, how much time they spend studying, what their issues are with regard to child care, all of those kinds of measures we hope to have, in our repertoire to begin to think about how to put this data together for people, teams of teachers, instructors, and instructional leaders at the technical college system. Let me back up a little bit here. So what we wind up doing with all of this data when we have it aggregated and put together in terms of a baseline profile of first-year students. So we've got all this data on these first-year students who were there in these MET programs for the first time in 2011, 2012. Plus we also have a baseline cohort that goes back to 2006 through 2008 of the same kinds of students from the entire technical college system. But we hope to begin to work with teams or help teams of people understand at the technical colleges that these root cause analysis strategies, like figuring out what the improvement target is, doubling the proportion of students who earn college credit in math within 1 year of continuous enrollment. We want them to look broadly at math and science and engineering and technology curriculum and come up with these kinds of inferences about what are the primary causes and what are the typical kinds of solutions that you can find in the research literature and in the data patterns that suggest which kinds of instructors, what kinds of combinations of general education, liberal education, technical education, work-based learning experiences, on-campus learning experiences, seem to be critical in terms of generating good, high-quality outcomes. So the big research questions for us, and we'll end with this, is what are the key questions for conducting implementation research that's focused on the interface between education and the economy in these kinds of settings? To what extent do loosely, moderately, and tightly aligned learning practices influence regional MET outcomes? How and to what extent does the pattern of learning practices alignment matter in regional outcomes, regional MET outcomes? What are the costs and benefits and outcomes associated with regional innovation partnerships? Are they sustainable? So we put these professional learning communities together. We have networks of people across instruction, across administration, across data, institutional data offices, figuring out how to diagnose and analyze instruction and improve instruction, and what kinds of, what does it cost to do that, and how can we support that. I was really struck in some of our early conversations in the focus groups at the technical colleges. We made a point to include in our grant money to provide instructors with stipends to do some of this research with the data. And all of our technical colleges said to us, we're not going to pay them for doing their job, So their sense of how teachers or instructors have a responsibility to look at student results, look at data, to examine things that they already have, like employer graduation, or employment follow-up studies, employer satisfaction data. All of that's critical to this environment. And what are the unanticipated benefits of MET learning and research partnerships for key stakeholders? So what's in this for employers? So I think that some employers are going to want to, manufacturers are going to want to stay, or they're going to want to come to Wisconsin if they have more access to learning environments in which their employees can work part-time, go to school part-time, and get the kinds of technical skills that are going to be available through these, quality programs and these relationships. And maybe they're willing to turn over part of their computer-aided manufacturing facilities for instructional purposes so that technical colleges don't have to front the cost for those high-end, robotics simulation, environment kinds of activities. So there are lots of payoffs for tighter alignment. I think we can see payback calculators that provide localized and personalized data for students. These big questions that you see on the front page of Time, how can we still move up in America, are basic questions about mobility and opportunity, and the extent to which these kinds of programs can give kids understand the pathway that exists and what the trade-offs are between engineering and welding, for example, in Appleton. We hope to be able to provide data and analytics that allow them to answer those kinds of questions. And all of these stackable, certificates. So we get IT certificates, we get manufacturing production technology, quality control certificates. What do they add up to? Is the net effect better earnings, more earnings, better employment stability? What do those things account for? And I think there are big payoffs as well for the improvement questions. To what extent are our graduates successful looking at success scorecards, having searchable databases where students can go into that database and find somebody who looks like them and graduated from this technical college 3 years ago. To what extent do they have a job? How much are they earning? Where are they living? What are they doing? And then lastly, I think these programs have, and I think we're going to figure out how to capitalize on these great social networks. So Facebook and Twitter and all these other kinds of things, helping students to find part-time job opportunities or find paid internships or find good projects to work in that would be beneficial to their manufacturing 101 class, but at the same time produce a product that might be a solution for a local manufacturing company would be good things to have. So it's going to improve, I think, instruction as well as outcomes for students, and certainly improve tools that help students figure out where to go and what to do. And I think with that, I'm done. We're ready for cookies? Dean?
How confident you are? How good is the data reported to you by business and industry? It seems to me it's episodic. It goes up and down. It seems to be, the stuff I hear anyway, doesn't seem to have a lot of data background. It seems to be off the top of the head of business people who are reporting it at a conference or a panel. And then it changes so fast. Suddenly the state gets a big contract to build ships and trucks in Oshkosh. And suddenly we need welders.
Right.
And we never heard of welders for the previous 5-10 years.
Right.
It seems to me that a lot of this is built on quicksand.
Yeah, I think that's right. The projections are, and I think everybody will tell you, very, very problematic. The assumptions we could make about, labor and economic investment capital are not, assumptions that we can continue to make the way we did 5 and 10 years ago. So, the extent to which the shipbuilding companies can compete for government contracts with the Navy to build ships or to repair ships or to, change the energy systems inside those fleets is going to be part of the issue. The data that we're going to work with is the unemployment wage record data. So it'll tell you, the industry in which they've been employed, the quarterly earnings. Doesn't give you the occupation in which they were employed, but the industry that they were in, and we want to be able to tie that back to and use the data that are known as the client reporting system data from the technical college. So, how many courses and credits did they get in the technical major? How much and what kind of communication skills do they have on the transcript? Those kinds of data, I think, when linked to the most recent graduates of technical colleges in terms of where are they working, how much are they earning, what's their stability of employment, and what's the industry sector that they're in, will give us some clues. But I think you're right, Dean. I mean, this is far from a perfect, scenario. And my only argument, I think, is that for the sake of the young people and for the workforce in general, we've got to have more data, more alignment of the data to understand what's going on in each sector so that we can respond accordingly with programs and with guidance and counseling and with information tools that make the navigation of that treacherous economy more viable for young people and for older workers as well. So yes.
What are the costs to a vision of higher education where the goal is to serve the economy versus serving the individual?
Well, that's a good question, and I mean that's open for debate. I mean, these issues that surround ChemCom, for example, or Project Lead the Way. The question is it good math and science, or is it application of math and science at some fairly obscure inane level? And I think that having taught high school and having listened to high school teachers and watched high school kids for the last decade, the question inevitably seems to come up: where and how am I going to use this? So I think the argument about, is it general education or liberal education, and what's the mix between liberal education and professional and technical education, is going to be, part of the issue that we're going to have to negotiate class by class, program by program, and community by community. And I think we need to figure out how to use these applications of knowledge and experience and skills in the workplace when it comes to building ships up in and around the northeast quadrant of the state. Make those viable opportunities for people to learn how to run businesses, or to apply their physics skills, or apply their technical skills, and understand how to communicate, as well as work in teams to make sure that those ships are built in the appropriate way. So, good question though.
Okay, I think we'll have
Thank
to
you.
stop. Thank you very much.